next session up, and it's a panel discussion this time, and we're talking about the role of data management in driving more sustainable procurement and producing business insights. So another great session coming up. So I'm going to invite all my panelists here. Thank you very much for joining us. So as I said before, you can go and find out much more about these speakers in the Meet the Speaker area, so go and read their profiles and find out more about us. But we have here today Stephen Day, who's Global Chief Procurement Officer at Kantar, Lauren Feary, Head of Global Procurement and Transformation at Diageo, Laura Hobbs, Head of Procurement for G Network Communications, and Vera Rozanova, is that right, Vera? Sorry, Chief Procurement Officer at Rusagaro. Thank you for joining us all, everybody. Thanks a lot. So we're here to talk about data, and specifically around sustainable procurement. And there's a greater onus really on organisations to have a deeper visibility of their supply chains. And we talked briefly with the session with Dan on this from a compliance perspective. And but are organisations driving the agenda themselves? How are you addressing this in your organisation? Steve, do you want to go first?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for the question. Kantar is a data analytics business, so we provide insights to people around the world. In fact, one of our clients is on this panel today, so I have to be careful about what I say. But, you know, a lot of the global brands are increasingly asking questions of a company like Kantar about what does our supply chain look like from a number of dimensions. You know, what does it look like from diversity and inclusion? What does its scope 3 emissions strategy look like? And then more importantly, you know, what does its employment practices look like with the with the suppliers that it uses around the world? Now, all of that is coming together at a perfect time as we actually within Kantar, we're doing a technology deployment in terms of how we run and operate our supply chain. And what's become very obvious is that the importance of what we call the golden record. And it wasn't so long ago that those kind of supplier records were pretty static pieces of data. You know, it was the address of the supplier, you know, maybe a contact detail, et cetera, et cetera. And now, through the points I've just made a moment ago, it's actually becoming a very active piece of data intelligence that you want to keep curating throughout the course of your engagement with a particular supplier and thereafter. So that's what we're doing. We're creating what we call a golden record for all of our suppliers. And now we are embellishing that golden record now with details about what does their security profile look like? What does their reputational profile look like? What do they score in terms of diversity and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera? So we can start building up a much more holistic picture of what's the DNA of our business and then the DNA of the supply chain that we use to support our clients' work.
Excellent. Lauren, how are you addressing this visibility at Diageo?
I mean, this is very critical and comes straight to our brand and reputation and being a very much a trusted organisation. It is really, really challenging when you have a complex supply chain such as ours. We have everything from smallholder farmers in various markets right through to partners that do marketing and analytics. So a huge variety. I think we've very much adopted a risk-based approach. So certain categories by nature are higher in sort of risk, particularly around, you know, ethical sourcing and compliance type challenges, as well as countries. I mean, naturally, certain countries have higher propensity for risk or anti-bribery, corruption, fraud, etc. So I think it's very difficult that there's no perfect source of information. Not all information is available. You know, we do use a combination of audit partners where we need to go deeper into some of those higher risk areas, and that works very well in terms of that approach. But then we also use other types of insight partners, and you know, there's lots of different great solutions out there to help you have a broader lens over your supply chain. You know, partners like EcoVadis, etc. So we use a combination, I think. But fundamentally, when you do have it, it's what you do about it. I mean, you can have the visibility, but it's what are you going to do about it? So where we try to focus is where we do prioritise going deeper, it's really about partnering with those providers and suppliers or industry solutions to lift the performance. So, you know, we've got a number of examples, just speaking about the constraints of glass around the world at the moment. You know, we're working with glass partners on working hours and looking at more, how do we move beyond just looking at the visibility into action and collaboration to solve business challenges and problems around compliance and ethical sourcing.
Excellent. Laura, tell us a little bit about you and your organisation and how you're addressing deeper visibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, predominantly I've worked in the construction industry, and as many know, I guess the construction industry, I think, accounts for nearly up to 40% of CO2 emissions. So for us, there is a really big drive to go net zero carbon. So I think every organisation is scrabbling around trying to create this this data capture in a very unique way to each individual organisation, and they're assessing how they're going to measure that in different ways. One of the things we realised from actually Brexit and COVID is as organisations, we're all going out individually to capture this information. Please tell us what your lead times are. Tell us, you know, if you're struggling. What we realise is we're actually adding to the burden of these organisations who are trying to actually manage their own supply chain. So we realised as a group that we needed to come together and actually collaborate to get this information. So we went out to the supply chain once. And one of the initiatives we're looking at now is for carbon. We're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to get the carbon from a very complex supply chain. We're going to, you know, tier 2s, tier 3s, right down to the materials that we bring in for construction, which are heavily embodied with carbon. But we're all asking for the same information. And what made us think is there's no one place to get this information. Why can't we just press a button and that information has been already uploaded somewhere, and we can just use that data, which is the same data that all of our competitors have. We all have the same data, and then we can use that data to make informed decisions in our own business and drive our strategy. So we're looking to do something collaborative with a group that I chair, the Senior Construction Leaders Group for the construction industry. And we're looking to see if we can kind of pull together our resources and go out to some of those key material items to get one set of data. But it's really challenging, you know, to get to net zero, you need that data, and it's just not there. And also it changes regularly.
Yeah, no, definitely. Vera, I'd like to bring you in at this point. And, you know, is the drivers really for coming from a compliance perspective, or is this a driver from organisations? How are you addressing this in your organisation to build greater visibility?
Yeah, as I'm originally from Russia, in Russia we are still in the very beginning of this very challenging journey. So it is driven both by our government and by the company as well. And we obtain this data from suppliers through audits, through asking them to certify with third parties. And the biggest challenge is to store this information and to have this information available online. And this is can be addressed through ERP system, through upgraded ERP system, through integration with the ERP systems of our suppliers and our customers, so that we have the end-to-end supply chain visibility. And we are just in the beginning of this way. And the most challenge here is that we should have trust in our strategic suppliers and our strategic partners in sharing this data, and they should trust us to share their data with us.
Yes, absolutely. I want to pick up on Laura's point about collaboration that she talked about in her response just then. And Lauren, if I can come to you and talk about what aspects of ECG that you're measuring, and how the data collection really varies from supplier to supplier, and if there's any kind of collaboration going on in your sector.
First of all, I love Laura's story. I think there's just so many examples across all of the people on the call today where we could collaborate with industry partners that are non-competitors to actually drive these solutions together. you know, in terms of what we measure and focus on, obviously Diageo's done a lot of recent publication around its 2030 ambition. But I think measuring various aspects of ESG are not new to us, but the ambition is big, and procurement has a massive part to play in that, particularly around Scope 3 carbon emissions. A lot of that will come from our major suppliers, you know, such as glass and you know, raw material and packaging providers. So I think for us, we do, as Steve knows, we're very focused on global supply diversity. So we're going beyond just North America into all the markets globally. I have a lead in that space that's really driving the agenda and momentum. It will be measured different ways because, you know, measuring supply diversity with elements like veterans in North America is perhaps not a focus in certain African markets. So every element of supply diversity is slightly different in different markets, and that creates complexity in how you measure it. And so when we're looking at collaboration solutions, I think absolutely in trailblazing global supply diversity, partnering with large FMCGs to co-create and go to big tech partners to say, look, this is what we need. We need a validation verification solution. There's hundreds of different data sources to validate supply diversity. Could you please come up with something for us, because we don't want to build it ourselves? So I think there's lots of opportunities for us to collaborate and partner with large digital organizations and software houses to actually help them set their roadmap. And I think that's really exciting. So I think other than supply diversity, we measure carbon emission with our third parties, very concentrated with our raw material and packaging partners, water, packaging, recycled content. It's very manual and that's a challenge, but I actually have a team that actually do all the group reporting. So we have to staff it with people. Over time, we're hoping it becomes more and more intuitive as the technologies evolve, but it is quite manual. And to Laura's point, I do feel for our providers because they're having to enter all this information multiple times with all their different clients. So I do think there's a tremendous opportunity for that, but it's early on the journey for us. I think that the challenge of something like IFRS, there's now standards coming out of COP26 around climate disclosure. So I think that as procurement professionals, we need to really be at the front end of that, because you know, we're going to have to start to comply with this throughout our source to pay business processes and systems. So I think it's a huge challenge, and I would love to collaborate with anyone who has the answers today, because we're still working through those answers.
Excellent. Steve, you talked briefly about capturing information on ED&I, and I know that everyone's looking at carbon. What other aspects of ECG are you measuring within your organisations, and how are you finding that data collection?
Well, I think I'm going to just amplify some of the points that Laura's just made, probably better than I will. I mean, the truth of the matter is there is no one size fits all, and what we've also got to appreciate, I think, is that protected characteristics in, I don't want to say mature markets, but markets such as the UK and North America are not necessarily protected characteristics in other markets around the world. So you do have to be quite sensitive to how you want to measure these things. Otherwise, I think there's a phrase I've heard at the moment called greenwashing. I think that applies to D&I. You can try and portray you're doing something globally when in fact it doesn't really have substance. So what we've done at Kantar is we've identified what we call the protected characteristics of 18 of our large markets. Now, and of course, in those markets, big chunk of that is North America, chunk of that is in the UK, of course, very mature ways of measuring diversity and inclusion, very mature in the States, as Laura said, veterans, for example, getting better in the UK. I think when you go further afield, it really becomes market by market type solutions. So one size doesn't fit all. You have to be quite sensitive to that. I think on the carbon emissions, I mean, it's a great point that Lauren and Laura have raised. I am fearful that we're all collectively going to start fatiguing our suppliers by asking them the same questions repetitively, always with a little nuance or a little different element of the question that means they have to consume more effort, irony, probably more carbon, trying to answer the very question that we're asking them in the first place. So I think one of the things I was a bit disappointed from COP is no real articulation of global standards in terms of how we can begin to start measuring things. I think that's going to be something that will, hopefully the politicians, and certainly I think collaboration through industry and professions such as CIPS, have a really prominent role to play, because what we can't do is have different measures for the same thing, because, you know, we're going to spend half the time trying to triage and identify what the data is telling us rather than using it meaningfully to drive action.
Absolutely. And Vera, you mentioned the maturity of the understanding and drive on this in Russia. And have you seen that through your suppliers as well? So when you're asking for this information, you know, are they starting from a lower maturity point and they don't have a handle on the information? Is that a challenge that you've seen?
Yes, sometimes it is a challenge, but we include such kind of questions in our questionnaires for suppliers to make them the criteria to qualify the suppliers, such as, for example, do they use the renewable sources of packaging? Do they reuse materials? Do they have some fuel reduction programs? And we promote them also to use the efficient technologies, so that all the materials and resources would be used very efficient. And we put these suppliers in a favorable position when we select them.
Excellent stuff. So getting better visibility, we've talked about being a real challenge. And I guess over the last 2 years as well, having this data and information has been really important for informing better business decisions. Is this an opportunity for procurement to carve out a more strategic role in this space, being that driver of that critical information? Laura, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, I think every crisis or opportunity, there comes a real kind of good time for procurement to step up to the table. COVID has done wonders for this industry. It's been horrific. We've all been affected, but it has actually raised the profile of procurement. And actually the ESG agenda and really sort of trying to capture this data is giving procurement the real keys to unlocking the opportunity for the business. So for me, it's really allowing procurement to become more strategic and have that seat at the table. I know that different industries are at different levels of maturity around where procurement sits, particularly in the construction industry. I really do think it will allow us to help drive the business strategy and to really inform that. We haven't really had that seat at the table before. So this is a real opportunity if we can do more than just collect data, which is something that we can all, you know, do. We can get the data, but what do we do with it? How do we then translate that to our senior board members to say, actually, do you know what, we need to change the way that we do this. We've got this new product, we've got this low carbon option. Actually, you know, could we speak to the client about doing something completely different around social value? And that's where I think the real challenge is for procurement. And it's going to be a completely different skill set. You know, we're not just buying things, we're not just transactional people anymore. We're really kind of taking that next step into driving the business's goals and strategies over the next decade.
Steve, do you agree? Do you think we're maximising this opportunity?
Oh, well, whether we're maximising it, I suppose that we could debate that endlessly. I mean, I think, you know, the how mature we are as a function. We've got wonderful examples on this call, and I'm sure there's people that are still very much beginning either their professional journey, or for that matter, the companies they're working for are just alive to the fact that procurement can do so much more. But I do think this is a golden opportunity for us to really reinvent what we're there to do, because I think, you know, historically, if you work for a CFO, you know, traditionally we're seen as the function that goes after the cost savings. But in truth, I think that journey is coming to an end pretty quickly, because I think our sourcing calculations now will increasingly have to factor in things like carbon costs and things like that. In fact, as here in the chap that runs Sainsbury's procurement, they're now actually factoring in costs of carbon into some of their sourcing calculations. And I think that things about social inclusion are also going to be things that we need to begin to start measuring and incorporating into the calculations around our sourcing decisions. So I think just on those two things alone, I think it's a golden opportunity for us to play a much more influential role in the course of a business's activities than historically it may have been the case.
Lauren, you definitely see this as an opportunity within Diageo to carve out a strategic role and inform the business much more.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those that know me, I've been around the traps doing transformation and restructures and organisational change for a few years now in procurement, and I've seen the real pendulum swing. I remember many years ago, you'd sort of lump research, analytics, data people, and you'd move them out of procurement, maybe into a shared services centre or digital and technology. We've actually brought them all back, and so they're part of my team because they're just so critical. So we have a focus on commodity price risk management, because we play a really key part in those sorts of strategies for the product we buy to make our product. We play a very critical role in research and insights across our categories and teams, such that we invest in it. And I think the other piece is we have to play a part in getting the foundations right. So the piece around the golden record really resonates with me. You can't build a house on sand. You just can't. And it may not mean you have the best ERP landscape, but you have to get the golden records right, because it's a foundation for all the other insights on top. So we're really taking, I guess, the bull by the horns to say, actually, it's my team's job to fix it. It's not just about a mythical data governance. It's about getting our hands dirty and actually running the interventions and projects to get those golden records clean and to make those interventions that really set ourselves up well to get the right insights. So I think we play a massive role, and I've definitely seen the pendulum swing back to functions investing in their own data analytics research type functions within procurement.
Vera, going to you on that point, do you think there's enough talent out there? Do you think procurement have the right technical knowledge and skills to handle this data, or do you think it is something that we really need to get up to speed with?
Yes, I think that current direction of procurement is surely towards data-driven and decision-making. And current specialists, young specialists, are much better than previous generation. They sometimes coming already with MBA or with PhD sometimes, but unfortunately, probably it is not in procurement, but in connected functions. But there is still a great demand, especially for the areas non-US, non-Europe, in small companies, in rural areas, and where procurement is less mature so far and still might be perceived as a transactional function. However, the companies now understand the importance of procurement, and they are looking for better and better specialists. And there is a lack of specialists on the market. That's why I see that it is a great SIP's role to step up and to make some probably modular educational programs on ESG, on data-driven decision-making for procurement, but it should be affordable for people. And another, I see a very big challenge is in some countries, there is no English knowledge at some extent, and those programs can be translated, and this will be of a great help for the whole profession in the whole world.
Absolutely, and you make a great point about young talent coming in, because they've grown up in a digital era, and like some of us, my kids can't believe that there was ever a time that the internet wasn't existed. But yes, so finding talent, and I guess looking much broader than in procurement pools is quite critical there.
Emma, I'd just like to amplify a point that Lauren made, which I really agree. We talk about reinventing the procurement function. I think taking back the ownership of our own analytics is a really important way of doing just that, because again, historically, you wanted a little bit of commodity analysis, and you had to beg, borrow or steal someone from the finance function to do that. We're fortunate at Kantar because we're setting up our own analytical capability to do just the things that Lauren said. And I think that for me is just a really big opportunity to kind of reinvent what we do, and you really use data in a very purposeful way to give better visibility to our colleagues within the business and kind of reshape some of those sourcing decisions that I mentioned earlier.
No, absolutely. And going back to Dan's point earlier, I think our role for procurement is to orchestrate the business through our supply base, and tapping into that information and that data, I think is really important to that. So let me just go to some of our questions from our audience. So people are interested in some of the third-party tools that you're using to capture sustainability, and how do you monitor suppliers kind of in a real-time basis? Steve, you're nodding. Do you want to pick that one up?
Well, it's very topical actually, because we've just finalised an arrangement with a data analytics third-party company where we will begin to start taking our golden records on a regular basis and washing them against their database, and begin to start checking them against a number of parameters, starting from the solvency of the firm that we're dealing business with, its reputational risk, the status of its directors, whether it's working in sanctioned countries, and all those kind of things. So that's kind of first stage. And we're doing that not to plug the solution, but just to give you some colour in terms of what we're using. We're using the Cooper risk management module to help us do that. So we'll hold our golden records there, and then we'll wash those golden records against that database on a regular basis now, to the point where it then becomes naturally fluid. Updates and changes to the supply records will happen automatically. So that's one thing that we're doing. In terms of the diversity inclusion piece, as I said, very challenging as it is, what we've done first stage was to run all of our North American spend through a database solution that I can't recall what their name is, but it's very similar to Tealbrook, just to give us a sense of the percentage of our third-party spend that's going through diverse and inclusive suppliers, and that's let us set a ceiling and then a target of where we want to get to over the course of the next 2 years. But again, emphasize the point, there is no one solution globally that I've seen that will answer this all for us. So we've got a solution in North America, we're finalising what we want to do in the UK, and then we'll begin to start progressively rolling out that approach into our 18 markets over the course of the next 12 months.
Excellent. Lauren, I guess there's multiple tools that you can use, and modern tools as well, all talk to each other. So tell us a little bit about some of the tools you're using.
I think I do believe that a lot of the unlock with ESG and carbon, particularly for our industry, is around linking things like the specifications we have in core ERP. So we hold a lot of our supplier specifications. If you can link and have common rules around the various ESG elements, you can link the transaction to that kind of record. So it then becomes, the invoice hits and then you can kind of just compute it. You don't have to ask for it. So I think there's a lot in that, but I think the solutions are still evolving. So I think there's a lot you can do within your existing core infrastructure with Power BI tools on top. And so that's what we've done a lot of. Like with supply diversity, we've taken core golden records in SAP/Cooper, and we've used that to surface the spend we've got with diverse suppliers. Now, we also use, I think Cooper Connexa is a product for supply diversity that has recently been acquired by Cooper, and I think they're expanding. But you know, there's various different types of solutions out there. We're still exploring around data aggregators. So how can we find someone that goes across all these different agencies across the globe to verify that the provider is diverse according to that country? So again, per Steve's point, that varies by country and market, because the providers in North America are not covering Australia or different markets that we have.
Yeah, sure.
So I think there's a combination of, like, there's a lot you can do with Power BI. So my team use Python, and also just automating some of the data feeds that we have today from core systems. The key thing is making sure you're collecting and maintaining it in that golden record. So I would say it's a combination. I wouldn't say it's overly sophisticated, but I think there's just so many different solutions emerging out there that you know, we're still in the journey of really assessing and looking at those.
Okay, great. And we're going to squeeze one last question in, so I don't know who wants to pick this one up. In a way, it's relatively straightforward to measure carbon footprint, but how do you measure the social impact your suppliers have? Is anyone doing that successfully and wants to, or even having a stab at it?
Probably I can add on that. We are measuring that our suppliers, for example, use local materials and local subcontractors, and this also developed a very good relationship with the local community.
Excellent. Steve, Lauren, doing anything in this space?
Honestly, at this point, you've stumped me because I'm not sure we've got an answer to that. So I think I'll just politely decline and thank the questioner.
No, and I think it's definitely something, a development area, and one that's perhaps more difficult to measure. Hey, thank you very much, Steve, Lauren, Vera, and Laura, who had to drop off at the end there. Great session. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thanks for the questions coming through from our audience.